Apilgrimageforbrianhaw, a spiritual journey of relevance from the ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral by Lee D. Miller. That's me. Right, day 6, Thursday the 30th of June 2011. I awoke a little bit later than planned and I heard the odd car pass on the road by the side of the field. I was in full view, but I didn't care as I had had my night's kip and would soon be gone. I opened up the tent and looked and took a view of the world once more. It was a delightful sight and it looked as if an equally delightful day was about to ensue. I quickly got dressed and was curious to see the ruined church as I hadn't had the chance to view it on the evening before. I took a little recce around it and it was very peaceful. Then I walked a bit further down the lane to discover a small bridge over a stream leading into a grand lake. It was an absolutely exquisite scene. I was rooted to the spot. The pure morning sunshine was reflected upon its surface and it shimmered and sparkled beneath its light. The air was so clear, and once again the natural colours of the tree canopies enveloping the lake looked vibrant in all of their shades of green, and the deep blue sky encapsulated the panorama. It was magical, it looked like heaven, and I didn't want to leave. I had to depart though because of the situation with my tent, but I logged the picture in my memory department like a freeze frame photo, so that I could access it at any time I desired. It was beautiful, top drawer, lovely. I found my way back to my camp and began to implement my morning routine, but with a bit of a difference this time, because this time I discovered that I was just about to be caught out by one of nature's calls, and I suddenly and desperately needed a number 2. Okay, we're always going to have to discuss this at some point, and in case you're not from the island of Great Britain and you're not completely familiar with certain phrases emanating from the shores of Blighty, you may now be wondering what a number 2 is. Well, basically, a number 1 is pretty easy to do, especially if you're a bloke, and a number 2 is a little bit more tricky. You get my drift? Well, let me be a bit more direct, but not a lot. It has to do with dollops and draws, and the avoidance of doing a dollop in your drawers, if you know what I mean. Do you understand now? Wasn't too difficult, was it? Not unless you needed a number 2 like me and there wasn't a cubicle with a flushing chain in sight. Usually when walking in England you come across and have the opportunity to use a civilised toilet at least once a day, be that a public one in a village or in a country park or even a pub. You tend to try and hold out for those moments, and sometimes you're even planning ahead for them. But as it turned out, this was the one day during my whole pilgrimage where I was most definitely caught out. Now, when you're in the wild, the general thing to do in this situation is to find a quiet spot, dig a hole and do your business. Then you make yourself wholesome again. Then you fill in the hole and bury all of your biodegradable waste in the process. You try to avoid any place that any other human being may accidentally walk through, but anyway, you always leave a place looking exactly as you found it and pretty much undisturbed. That's the process, and after you've done all that, you wash your hands. That's very important. Crystal? Sorted. And that's what I did. Well, apart from digging a proper hole because I didn't have a chance, I quickly found a place that was out of the way. Then I speedily made a shallow hole with my foot on the hill, but with my shoe. And then I only had a moment before it was bombs away. Because the hole was so shallow, I didn't put the cleaning material in it, but instead elected to place them in a bag, which I sealed, ready to dispose of when I found a dustbin. It was just a little present for the dustman, you know how it is. After my little adventure, after I filled in the hole and all that as well, by the way, after my little adventure, I returned to my tent to wash my hands, and then I made my breakfast. It was the time of just after 8 o'clock, and there were a few cars driving by on the road. Some drivers would give me a strange look, but most passed by without noticing my presence. Then I noticed a pickup truck drive slowly by, and the workmen inside observing me with an inquisitive look. The truck then sped off and drove in the direction of a large house in the distance. Oh dear, I thought, I've been collared. I finished my breakfast and then began to pack up as it was time to move on, and within about 5 or 10 minutes the truck reappeared again at a bit of a pace, stopping sharply outside the field and by the gate leading into it. A geezer then got out of the truck and started heading with purpose towards me and the field. He was a big burly type, about 6'3" tall, with a shaven head that was slightly balding and had the air of a mechanic or a groundsman about him. And as he approached the gate to the field, he seemed like he meant business. On first impressions, he looked like the type of bloke that you really didn't want to cross or have fun and games with. And I had the feeling that if I was about to have fun and games with him, then the odds were that it was me who was going to come off much the worse. But having grown up in Barking, odds like that mattered not a jot to me. Here we go, I thought. And then I immediately stood up and took a few purposeful strides of my own in his direction. But however, while saying ever so politely, "I'm ever so sorry, sir. I'll be gone in 5 minutes." He immediately stopped where he was after just passing through the gate, and it immediately stopped, and I immediately stopped where I was too. And then we began to conduct a conversation at a distance of about 15 yards. "I came over to ask what you think you're doing. You can't camp there. This is a private estate," he said forcefully, but also very civilly. "I'm really sorry," I repeated. "I'm doing the Pilgrim's Way and I'm on a pilgrimage to Canterbury. I was walking until late last night and I couldn't find anywhere to stay. I knew that this was an estate, but I thought I'd be alright camping bang on the path because I thought it was a public right of way," I explained. "No," he said, while looking at the path and my tent upon it. "That's not a public right of way, that's just a path we put in to allow access for the public," he corrected. "Oh, I'm so sorry then, but anyway, I'll be gone in 5 minutes. I was just packing up," I continued. "Okay," he accepted, and then, "You're West Ham then?" That very morning I'd put my West Ham United football shirt on. "Yeah, obviously. Are you?" I replied. "No chance," he answered, and then after a pause he said with some menace, "Millwall." Oh God, here we go again. I thought. For people who are not familiar with the term Millwall, it is another football team in the locality of East London that happens to be West Ham United's fiercest football opponents. There is much trouble and unfortunately much violence between the two sets of fans, and there is a history to that aggression. It emanates from days over a century ago when both teams originated from the island of Dogs, and the rivalry was formed. West Ham United FC was originally formed by the men from the Thames Ironworks and Millwall FC by the men from the Millwall Ship and Dockyards. Millwall was the first of the two football teams to become established, and for a time they were one of the strongest teams in the south of England. But after the Thames Ironworks formed, their team, the Irons, began to achieve more success and outgrew their home. This resulted in a move to Upton Park, and the Ironworks changed their name to West Ham United in order to widen their support base. Millwall, in the meantime, moved south of the river, and their star rarely shone as bright. However, and it is a sad thing for me to admit, because of the earlier successes, Millwall still edged the tally of wins in the head-to-head contests between the two clubs. "We'll be seeing you again this season. That makes a change, eh?" I said, with my first off-the-cuff dig. West Ham had just been relegated from the Premiership and joined Millwall in the Championship. "Yeah, I know. You've been trying to avoid us." He came straight back with, "Oh, top draw, good comeback," I thought. And then we proceeded to have a few minutes of banter. He was actually a decent bloke and I enjoyed the couple of minutes we spent in dialogue. The fellow then informed me that he had to return to his work, and the conversation actually ended with us both wishing each other's team good luck for the season ahead. Could you Adam and Eve it? That? I couldn't believe it. And so I shall just repeat that one more time because I'm still finding it difficult. The conversation ended with me wishing Millwall good luck for their season ahead and he wishing West Ham good luck for their season to come. And in all the history of planet Earth, I'll wager that has never happened before. It's amazing what a pilgrimage can do. Oh dear. The truck pulled away and I began to pack up my tent. And just as I predicted, and within 5 minutes I was off trekking down the tree-lined avenue which went through the middle of Eastwell estate. After a few hundred yards, the path then leaves the roadway and enters a large and fairly narrow field. As I walked along, I couldn't help but notice how lush and weed-free the grass was. This was definitely not a paddock I was walking through. It was more like a garden lawn on a grand scale. There must be a lot of hard work going into the care of and maintenance here, I thought, and literally, just as that thought drifted through my mind, the reason for the unnaturally perfect look crossed directly into my path, or rather, crossed directly over my path as I'd just trodden. It was a tractor with a chemical tank full of herbicides attached, and they were about to spray the field I was in. I was suddenly in a mad rush to get out. Of all the things I disliked the most about the world we now live in, it was this, the sickening and consistent spraying of toxic chemicals into our environment and onto the land, just for the sake of a nice lawn or weed-free garden, or for crops that require less human attention. It's senseless, it's lazy, and it's abhorrent to me. Why not do things by hand if you care about them, instead of inflicting more harm on the earth? It's moronic to me. Where do people think all those poisonous chemicals go? They don't disappear into thin air, they get absorbed into the land, enter the groundwater supply, and then we end up drinking them. Why do people do this? I thought as I upped my pace to evacuate the area. It happened to be a very long field I was walking through, and I was lucky enough in the fact that the man driving the tractor was taking his time to rig the whole thing up. But after a few minutes I saw him get back into the driving seat and the tractor began to head down the field towards me. I upped my gear once more and entered into a narrow trot, entered into that of a trot, luckily enough reaching the stile and exiting the field with plenty of time to spare. Phew, I thought, I hate that stuff. I carried on walking, but couldn't help thinking about the nonsense of what just happened behind me. It really annoyed me that all people seem to be talking about these days was their carbon footprint and climate change. Yet no one seemed to be talking about pollution anymore, or the amount of toxins and poisons that are being released into the environment and so destroying our habitat. I wondered if the estate would put a sign up to warn other walkers of the chemical hazard on the grass. It may have looked perfect, but I certainly wouldn't have wanted to take a picnic on it. As I departed the estate, I became very low on water again and needed to refill my bottles. I came out onto a main road and was hoping that I may find somewhere to refill them in the hamlet that I encountered. Across the main road were a village green and a cricket field, and right in the middle of the green was a man mowing the cricket pitch. I looked further across and saw that there was a pavilion clubhouse there too. I thought my luck was most definitely in, and so I walked across to the gentleman mowing the grass in order to ask if I may use the clubhouse to refresh my water supply. The man didn't notice me as I approached because of the noise of the mower and because he was concentrating on the work he was doing, and so I waited until he turned the mower around before I jumped into his line of sight. When he saw me, he stopped the two-stroke engine and acknowledged me. I explained my predicament and asked if it was possible to gain some water from the clubhouse, and the gentleman was more than accommodating. He took me over to Bolton and Eastwell Cricket Club building and opened it up for me, saying that I could also help myself to tea and biscuits if I wanted. I offered my appreciation but declined the invitation to tea as it was so extremely hot again, and all I really wanted was some water. I can't believe I just turned down a cup of tea, I thought to myself. The gentleman said I could please myself, and he left me in the old clubhouse to return to his mowing. I thought that was so kind, and it really struck me how much trust was given me just to leave me in the pavilion to sort myself out. I got myself back to full water capacity and headed out over the green to thank the man once again before venturing back onto the Pilgrim's Way. He acknowledged my gratitude with a hand wave while continuing the completion of his task. That was nice, I thought. The next section of the path follows a beautiful country lane from some distance before you cut across country and eventually pass through a field with a delightful oak tree by the wonderful site of St Peter and St Paul's Church in Bolton. It continues through some picturesque countryside and then through some woodland before finally coming out on a long lane leading to the beautiful town of Chilham. It was on this lane that I made the mistake of taking serious liberties with my unmentionables again, which throughout most of the day thus far have been on solid C-list celebrity status. However, after taking a late lunch break by the side of the woods before the long lane began, I opened out my pace because I was feeling cocky. and I was a muppet. And paid the inevitable price. The continued heatwave weather and the tarmac underfoot meant that by the time I reached near the end of the lane and just past the lake in the grounds of Chilham Castle, my plates of meat were back into the realms of A-listers once more, and I was finally learning my lesson that on this journey, speed was definitely not of the essence. I stopped to give myself another rest and take the charming views of the castle, which in all fairness seemed to look more like that of a manor house. And then I realised that I'd lost my sunglasses. Bugger, I thought, and then bloody hell. I remember back to when I last had them and recalled that it was when I stopped for lunch in the woods. That was a hell of a way back now, but because of the sun was so bright and the fact that I liked the glasses too, I was really torn at what I should do next. Should I take the tune of fuck it and walk all the way back to retrieve them, or should I take the tune of fuck 'em and continue walking on to Chilham? I went through about 6 rounds of fuck it and then fuck 'em malarkey before I realised that in the process I was actually getting closer and closer to the woods anyway. It was a nightmare. I was literally walking there a bit and I thought, oh no, I'm going back again. No, I'll go and get them. I was just literally walking. Probably written about this. Anyway, it was a nightmare. I absolutely couldn't decide what to do, and I was having some kind of indecision mental breakdown. I'll tell you what, I was absolutely behaving like a mental case, and I couldn't help myself. I resolved to just go and get the bloody things. And by the time I was more than halfway there, my feet were playing up so much I just couldn't face it, and I finally turned back to Chilham once more, and once and for all. What a donut, I thought to myself, and I realised that if I hadn't fucked about as much, I would have probably been to the woods and back by an hour anyway. I wasn't just a pilchard in that moment, I was a whole 10 of them. And now, my feet were going mental too. I'll just finish this by saying, it wasn't one of my finest moments. What a knob end. I was, oh dear. Anyway, that can be me at times. By the time I'd made it to Chilham, I was absolutely cream crackered and really needed a rest. I walked up a small incline to the centre of the village and beheld the marvellous sight of Chilham Market Square. It was exquisite and exceptional, and the medieval charm it still retained really lit up my spirit once more. So much so that I temporarily forgot about being knackered. I lingered for a short while and considered having a beer in one of the adjoining pubs, but to be fair, I was even too tired for that. I continued walking through Chilham and followed the North Downs Way through to the grounds of a beautiful church, eventually finding a bench in the shade underneath a willow tree, I think, and lay down on it. To all intents and purposes, it must have appeared that I was now imitating a homeless person, but I didn't care. It was lovely lying there, and after I took my backpack and my shoes off, I felt so at peace. There was a warm breeze blowing over me, and not many people passed by. I placed my book underneath my head and dozed off for an hour or so. It was bliss. After this extended period of rest, I reluctantly raised myself from my slumber and forced myself to move on, as the late afternoon had turned into early evening. I headed out towards Old Wives' Leys and on to Chartham Hatch, and I hoped that I would find a shop in one of the two villages. They both looked big enough to accommodate one, and I'd seen on my map that there was a pub in Chartham Hatch, which I thought would be ideal to stop at before I found a wild camp for the night. I realised that I was getting very close to Canterbury, but I didn't want to reach there that evening. I felt it would be better to arrive in the morning of the next day. Old Wives' Leys held no luck for me in the village shop department, and I was hoping that I would have more good fortune in Chartham Hatch. I asked a lady whom I passed en route through the village, and she said that she thought there was a shop indeed at Chartham Hatch, and that I should be okay to get some supplies. With that reassurance, I pressed on with my unmentionables, safely in the B-list category of celebrity status once again. After Old Wives leaves, the North Downs Way takes a direction through the middle of some of Kent's largest orchards, and I had an interesting experience as I travelled through. There's a point where you walk by the static caravan accommodation of all the seasonal workers, and it's as if a small village, and as if it's a small village in itself, or even a holiday camp. But the thing was, as I passed the habitable areas, there was no sense of fun or contentment in the air. I noticed people sitting outside some of their caravans, and as I walked by I gave my usual friendly acknowledgement, but all I received back were blank stares and even looks with a touch of hostility. It wasn't nice, and it was clear to me that these people were not happy. It was also clear that they were not English, as I heard foreign dialogue too as I passed. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for these people, or to feel offended by their ignorance towards me, and so I chose to feel neither, and just accepted that's just how they were. Maybe it was a cultural thing, I thought. Either way, it again led me to feel a degree of sadness. Years ago, I knew that these orchards would have been filled with local English people working hard and having a laugh while they were doing so, and I realised that there was another part of my country that had been lost. But why are the English people not doing these jobs anymore, I thought. It was a big question, and one that I assumed had many answers. I found my way out of the orchard fields and headed towards Chartham Hatch. I found the North Downs Way to be poorly marked along this section, and so I had to navigate my own way to the centre of the village from there. I found the lane leading by the pub I earmarked, but carried on walking past the pub in order to find a shop first. The lane led into a residential area, and I followed the North Downs Way signs directing through an alleyway and out onto another street. But there was no sign of a shop or any people around. It was deserted. I really needed to find someone to ask, and so, because of the previous road I was on seemed busier, I retraced my steps back through the alleyway, and just as I reached the road, I happened to spot a 10 or 11-year-old kid riding along on his bicycle. But this kid wasn't just any old kid though. Oh no, this kid was special, and I don't mean with his needs. Because this kid was wearing a West Ham United football shirt. Come on. Little man, I called out as I flagged him down. Lions, I declared. He stopped but didn't reply, and instead just gave me a very peculiar look. Whoops, I thought, as I realised I'd probably just been a little bit too over enthusiastic and familiar. Look, West Ham, I then said, pointing to the obvious on my shirt, but I still only received a blank expression in response. It was clear that out of the two of us, I was the only one getting excited about our unexpected West Ham connection, and he didn't seem to be all that impressed. Didn't he realise how amazing it was? Oh dear. This kid really needs to grow up, I thought. Do you speak English? I asked a bit sarcastically, feeling and having a bubble. Yeah, he replied. On top 12. I said, well, I just wondered if you could let me know if there's a shop in the village. Dunno. He answered. Oh, I said, a little bit confused. Do you live here then? Yeah, he said. Oh, so could you tell us where the shop is? So how come you don't know where the shop is? I asked, even more confused. Dunno, he repeated. This was going nowhere fast, and to be honest, I was wondering what was going on. My feet were absolutely killing me, and I didn't really want to be walking any yardage or mileage, any extra than I needed to. Oh, where'd you get your sweets and chocolates from then? I knew all the sweet shops when I was a kid. I explained, trying to be funny. Oh, there might be one, he suddenly remembered. And this confused me even more. How can you come up with an answer, oh, there might be one, when you live in a village with only 2 or 3 streets in it? Well, where might there be one? I was getting really confused. Where might there be one then? I asked, not giving up all hope. If you go down there and then follow that road, there's a building, and sometimes something's open in it. My mum goes there sometimes, he tried to explain. I really didn't know what to make of it, and and so I tried my best to confirm that there definitely was something worth looking for. So if I go back along there, the alley, and turn left, at the end of that road, there'll be a shop, I repeated very questioningly. I think so. I don't know if it'll be open though. I can take you there if you want, he said honestly, and appearing to be as helpful as he could. He actually seemed like a really nice lad. Oh thanks, matey. I'll give it a go then, I finally finished. With that, he turned his bike into the alleyway and rode it slightly in front of me. As I followed him, I persevered with my chit-chat about West Ham, but it was all to no avail. The lad then turned left at the end of the alleyway, and after another short distance, he pointed to where he thought the shop might be. After that, he then turned his bike around and cycled back the way he came. I shouted out thanks before I headed off to follow his directions in the hope of there being a shop at the end of the rainbow. I reached the junction at the end of Bigbury Road, and which was also signed the Pilgrim's Way, and looked around, but only discovered a village hall. There was nothing that appeared to resemble a shop anywhere, and so I looked at the village notice board to see if there was any information that may have been of help. I soon saw why the kid was so confused about the possibility of a shop being in Chartham Hatch though, because the signage did exactly the same to me. I was like, is there a shop here or not? It appeared that there was something that was open a couple of times a week for a brief period of time, but it didn't appear to be a shop as such. It appeared to just be some kind of vegetable stall, I guessed. But I have to say that even after reading the sign, I was still none the wiser myself. What did I know was that, what I did know though, was that I wouldn't be able to purchase any milk or supplies, and that I'd made my belated apologies to the kid who wasn't there for thinking he was a muppet. Enough was for one day, I thought, and I decided to walk back to the pub for a cheeky beer en route. I wondered if I'd be able to buy some milk in the pub anyway, and so I wasn't too disillusioned. Right, that whole little section there with that kid, when I originally wrote it, I was portraying the emotions, the frustration and the emotions I was going through during that moment. And some people who read it said, you was a bit harsh on that kid. I guess I was trying to be funny but also honest. And I've actually rewritten this book. This is my dad's copy. The original one I ever did, like just printed from photocopies. And and I've actually, that whole section I've really reworded out of the emotion, and I've actually made it look like I'm the mug all the way through. But it was quite funny actually, especially the old West Ham thing. I think the more men grow up, the more we turn like kids when it comes to football. I think the kids must get this learned behaviour. I think it's the truth. I think we've discovered the truth here, and actually, when we get further on, you're going to find something else out as well. I had another experience, made myself look like a mug, or rather, a 10-year-old made me look like a mug. But it was all good-natured and in good jest. I don't mind. Yeah, anyway, we're going to finish that bit there. And so on to the chapter arms. To read another chapter. Alright. Oh, blimey. I think I mugged myself off. Certainly mugged someone off. Anyway, right. Alright, thanks, Brian. Lots of love.